We have one of those Sundays, which actually seems to be happening a little bit more frequently these days, where we got a lot of different things happening at the same time. And in my crazy mind, whenever I preach, I want to kind of tie all those things together somehow. And like on the agenda today, we've got Susan and Pat celebrating their coming marriage this Friday at a brunch after church. Everyone applaud, yay. And at the same time, we're going to be doing a class about funeral planning. Yay! I used to call myself the skeptical preacher. I think now I'm calling myself the mad priest. Like, what am I doing? But then on top of that, we've got Jesus today having these like pretty harsh words about divorcing, and I actually cut out the worst of it. So I actually spared you. It gets worse. And then I wanted to skip to the children, anyway. So we got that, and then we've got this Genesis reading, right? From the beginning. How do they all tie together? Do they all tie together? Well, I'm going to give it a shot. So stick with me. Let's just jump right into actually that Genesis reading. Go ahead and open up your bulletin again to page 2 and page 3. So this is, you might not know this, but there are at least 2 creation stories in the Bible. There's the 7-day, 6 days of creation, and then God rests on the 7th day. That's one creation story, and then immediately is a second creation story. These have different origins, different language, and if you follow the plots, they are actually irreconcilable. They tell the story completely differently. You have to hold them together. You can't try to say, oh, it's all the same story. And thanks be to God for that. As a priest friend of mine used to say about the Gospels, they're so true that you need at least 4 different versions of the life of Jesus. Same thing with creation. So this is the second creation story. Instead of all the animals being created first and then humans at the kind of pinnacle of creation, humans kind of come first and then the animals come later. At least one human does. And as we were reading it this morning, it might have struck you that it didn't quite sound right. The language didn't sound quite what you remember, if you remember anything about this story, because you've probably heard this story told with it saying, the man did this, the man did that, right? The man. And instead, the translation that you have in front of you says, the human. And you might be thinking to yourself, oh, here goes that millennial priest again being all PC. But I'm not, I swear. Actually, the original politically correct translation was to say the man, because being politically correct is always a matter of what is politically, valuable at the time. And for a long time, it was politically valuable to say that man was over woman. Man came first, woman came second. And so it was mistranslated in English for centuries in order to support that ideology. In the Hebrew, the word that's translated as human today and that you have heard as man is the word Adam, A-D-A-M. You might recognize that as a proper name, Adam, but it's not in this story. It's the Adam, the human. Everywhere else in the Bible where the word Adam is, it means human or humanity. And so that's how the story goes. It's the human. Adam itself is a bit of a pun, because the word for earth or dirt or soil in Hebrew is Adamah. And remember how the Adam is created from the dust of the earth, from the dirt, in order to till the dirt. That is why God creates the human, to till and to care for the earth. Keep that in mind. So the plot goes on. The Adam, the human, is created. But God notices the Adam, the human, is lonely because there's only one of them. So the human needs a companion. Who shall it be? God says, I will create all these animals. And God brings all these animals to the human. And the human names them, gives them each their name that they are still known by now. But none of them is a suitable companion. So God then causes the human to fall into a deep sleep and takes from his what? So rib is what you usually hear this translated as, right? And if it's rib, then it's like, okay, just a tiny piece, right? Just you wouldn't even notice it taken from the human to create this other creature. But the word for rib actually should be probably better translated as side or flank. So kind of follow the imagery here, right? Humans are created out of the dust and the dirt. We're kind of like a clay figurine in God's hands. From the side, so kind of if you were like playing in the dirt and making your own little creatures, and you wanted to create a second one, you would kind of take from this side and kind of do this. And then maybe ball them up and then create two separate ones. It's that kind of imagery that's going on here. It is not that this little piece of the man becomes then the basis for the woman. It's the Adam, the human, is then split into two. And it's only once this happens that then we get the gendered words. Ish for man, Isha for woman. So that as the story goes, it says God made a woman from the side of the human. But if we're following the logic of the story, it should probably better say, God made someone that would then become known as woman. Because remember, what is the human doing with every creature that is brought to make his loneliness better? He names them, or they name them. We might say. Won't get into that pronoun. Anyway. The human names them. And same thing here. This is the completion of that whole arc of the story. This other creature is brought by God to the human, and then the human names, this is woman. For out of man, he names himself man, names the other woman. So it's not clear at all, unlike in the first creation story that Jesus cites, not to get you too confused, it's not at all clear in this story that what God intended to create was the difference of gender. It's humans that make the choice to use those words, to use the name man and woman, that this will be the difference that distinguishes the two kinds of creatures that we are. More fundamental, much more fundamental to understanding what this story is really getting at is that what God creates is difference at all. Difference out of sameness. Whether or not it's gender or something else, that the fundamental thing about what it means to be human is that we are lonely and we need another like us who is also different from us. That is the fundamental, we might say, tragic nature, almost, of what it means to be human. To be both the same, bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh, and different. I am Ish, you are Isha. And that then becomes how the rest of the story in the Bible, the stories of the Bible, and we might say just the arc of human history unfolds, the unfolding of all of the differences between us, in all of the magnificent ways that we are different from one another. as classes of people, as nations, as individuals, different from one another. And as the story also goes, in both the Bible and history, those differences, of course, are the basis of the conflicts between us. That seeking for companionship that is only possible because we are different from one another is also what keeps us separated from one another. And that, friends, is the thumbnail definition of sin. Everyone take a deep breath. Right? Because for today, I'm just inviting you to think about this. That what ties all of these topics swirling around us here at St. Gregory's today, what ties all these things together, is that it is God's one mission, God's overriding and underwriting concern to tie us together, which is a very different complexion to religion than is often bandied about these days. That what God really desires for us is that we should not be lonely, but that we should have one another as we were created for one another. And that this is brought to its fullness in the teachings, the ministry, the incarnation, the suffering, the death, and the resurrection of Jesus. And in all the things that Jesus touches by his presence, in how he touches on marriage, and what marriage is actually for, and what his people had forgotten that marriage was for, that had become too contractual, too easy, too much about fulfilling my own needs, too much about kind of elevating one's own status in the world. And so he gets hyperbolic about divorce, not out of, in order to condemn people who rightly need to end a marriage that should be ended, but in order to press home the point that the point of marriage, like so much else given to us by God, is that we be bound together, that we not be lonely, that we have a companion in this life, and that the differences between us become the means by which we fulfill the loneliness in one another. And the same thing with children. That arc of logic going from bringing married couples back together in that sense of companionship, and then also turning to children. Because what a difference, right? What a difference to overcome adults and children. But that difference is not something to like, oh, that's too much work. That's too inconvenient. I'm done with that. Where there is difference, Jesus says, no, go in. Go in deeper. Go in for the embrace. Go in to find that companionship that God created that difference to fulfill. And then finally, I'm going to bring it home now, death itself. I mean, is there any greater difference than between the living and the dead? Right? And even, maybe especially here at the grave, God's one concern is overriding. So intent is God in the mission of us not being alone. So intense is God's love that binds us to one another, that not even death can separate that which God has joined together and intends to join together. And when we get into that space later today, and I really do hope you all consider coming to that, because it's not just if you think that your funeral is coming really quickly. Though do that if you think it is. And if it is, let me know, because I want to know about that. It's really a spiritual exercise for all of us, because I'm going to steal my own thunder here. The thing that a funeral can do is being a way to communicate to those who are still living once you are dead. It's a way of, in the same way that planning a marriage We take so much time and effort and put so much love and joy into planning marriages because we're marking the fundamental change in a relationship. It's the same thing with a funeral. It's a fundamental change in the relationship we have with our loved ones, but it's not a destruction of that relationship. And so why not put a lot of love and joy and thought and care and time into marking the change in that relationship? Because as scary as death is, and it's scary to me too, as heartbreaking and sad as it can be to be separated in death from those we love, still, even so, in Jesus, death is made a holy thing. In death, we see yet another incarnation of God's abiding love and mission to bind us to one another. Amen.